Good morning, Andover, and welcome to the celebration of reunion. My name is Jenny Savino, and I'm the director of the alumni office here. Head of school Raynard, Kington, and I are coming to you from our beloved Cochran Chapel. While nothing beats a reunion when we welcome you home to the 01810, this weekend has provided unique opportunities. We have seen alumni across 8 decades, 5 continents, hopping online to catch up with each other, participate in back to the classrooms, and compete in Andover trivia. We see you, and we are so pleased that you are taking advantage of the 92 different engagement opportunities across our reunion schedule this weekend. At this time, I would like to welcome Steve Matloff, class of 91. Steve is our Alumni Council president and a long-standing volunteer across pretty much every volunteer role there is at Andover. We had the pleasure of having Steve with us on campus last weekend for commencement exercises. This morning, Steve is joining us from his home in Los Angeles, also known as Wester Quad. Steve, you are a tireless volunteer in the work that we do. Thank you.
Good morning, Andover. It is great to be here. As Jenny said, I am Steve Matloff, class of 1991 and president of Alumni Council, which officially represents our alumni community. I am pleased to call to order this annual meeting of the Andover-Abbot Alumni Association. As you can see, through the magic of Zoom backgrounds, I am coming to you from the Garver Room. So I will try to deliver my report without being shushed by fellow students or removed from library staff. It's wonderful to be here with all of you today. As a member of the great class of 1991, woo! I am excited to be celebrating my 30th. Special welcomes are due to the classes of 1970 and 1971, both celebrating their 50th reunions. The classes of 1995 and 1996, celebrating their 25th reunions, and the classes of 2015 and 2016, celebrating their 5th reunions, with many more to come. And this is the moment when normally there is a huge eruption of screams in the chapel. I also want to recognize members of the old guard, those alumni who graduated 70 or more years ago. They are led by our most senior class of 1945, celebrating their 75th reunion. While nothing can compare to us being together in the chapel in person, in the place that many of us still think of as home, this virtual setting has allowed many alumni who may not have been able to make it to campus this weekend to be part of this important Andover experience. We all have found new ways to connect with our friends and loved ones, including with and even particularly with our Andover-Abbot family. Over the past year, Andover hosted 140 virtual events ranging from class gatherings to non-CIBI projects to panel discussions to an Abbott Heavenly Goo baking tutorial and more. These events have provided opportunities for meaningful connections to fellow alumni at a time when connecting has been especially important, and to learn about Andover as it is today. This weekend is another opportunity for that, and I encourage you to participate in all that this weekend has to offer. Thank you to all reunion planning volunteers and fundraisers who have worked tirelessly to make this weekend a success. As Alumni Council president and as an alumni trustee, I have seen firsthand how the nearly 3,000 alumni volunteers from Andover and Abbott from 9 different decades have been key partners in the work of the Academy. Thank you all for all of the ways in which you give your time and talents to our great community. It certainly is better because of your contributions. The Alumni Council is a body of volunteers selected to serve 4-year terms. I have the pleasure of leading council along with Vice Presidents Marissa Connors-Hoyt, class of 1999, Tracy Mullings-Reed, class of 1992, and Doug DeGata, class of 1988. Council meets in the fall and the spring and engages in committee work that partners council members with extraordinary professionals across the campus. This work includes learning about, being updated on, and helping to plan most facets of alumni engagement, including alumni interviewing, regional programming, and the creation and distribution of class notes. We work closely with the pros at Andover to connect alumni and parents both on the Hill and off the Hill. Alumni have been an active part of the school since our founding in 1778. The Alumni Association took many forms during the Academy's first 168 years. And in 1946, Alumni Council was formed with the mission to connect the school and its alumni in a formative way. Since then, almost 1,400 alumni have served on Alumni Council and are alumni of Alumni Council. The Alumni Council of today is roughly 140 members with representation from 26 states and 5 countries. During this year that will close on June 30th, we have 48 classes represented spanning from 1951 to 2016. And I'm really excited to say that for next year, a member of the class of 2017 is part of our incoming Alumni Council junior class. So we will have 49 classes represented. Among the initiatives that have come out of Alumni Council are Non-Civi Day and the Athletics Hall of Honor, which held its induction ceremony on Thursday. We are thankful for our alumni body's time and the treasure it shares. This year, as we celebrate, I'd like to acknowledge the generous gifts from all reunion classes. From our 25th reunions, last year, the class of 1995 raised over $1.9 million through 24% participation. This year's class of 1996 is on pace for a similar result with a current total of almost 1.2 million and 25% participation. From our 50th reunions, last year, the class of 1970 had 33% participation for Abbott and 24% for Phillips, and a collective reunion gift of over $2.1 million. This year's 50th reunion class of 1971 currently has 27% participation for Abbott and 33% for Phillips. Their collective reunion gift impressively stands at over $8.6 million. And a special shout out to this year's 75th reunion with almost $1.3 million raised and 24% participation. Additional information about Alumni Council and class fundraising efforts can be found in the Reunion virtual platform. Congratulations to all. I will now turn it over to our 16th head of school, Dr. Raynard Kington, and a parent of a member of the class of 2024.
Thank you, Steve, for your tireless leadership of Alumni Council and for your service on the board. As we look ahead, we welcome new alumni trustees, Ginny Amstutz, 86, the next president of Alumni Council, succeeding Steve, and Anna Durham, 78, as the senior annual giving board co-chair, succeeding Dan Lastman, 73. Congratulations to Ginny and Anna. Good morning, Andover. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today as we celebrate Reunion Weekend 2021. For many of you, reunion is a time to reconnect with friends and classmates and teammates in a place that you call home. It's amazing to see 30 classes across 7 decades of Phillips and Abbott alumni celebrate with one another. And we know that you are missing campus, and we look forward to the time when we'll be back in person soon. I imagine that many of you are eager to hear a few updates on how the campus community is doing. And we're fortunate that our students were able to return in full this spring. And I'll start there, then I'll add a few thoughts on planning forward for Andover. As the past 65 weeks have unfolded, like every institution really around the world, the Andover community has had just endless conversations on how we could navigate the COVID pandemic. This has been a year of constant assessments and reassessments. We basically had to reinvent almost every aspect of the school. And it's been a challenging 13 months for our students and their families. And we have been fortunate to have the continued support of our alumni and parents, and appreciate all that you've done to help us through this difficult time. So how is life on campus going? Let me touch on a few different areas. First, from a health and wellness standpoint, Dr. Amy Patel, our fearless medical leader, and the Sykes Wellness team continue to manage our health protocols and testing with really extraordinary care and a close eye on a wide range of metrics that we follow regularly. Most recently, we were able to partner with Lawrence General Hospital and secure vaccinations for all students age 16 and older, and to ensure just the process of assuring that we have the necessary permissions and that all the paperwork was completed before students arrived to get the shots. There was an amazing amount of coordination that was required among parents and guardians and students and the Sykes Wellness Care team and our community partner, Lawrence General Hospital. And we again partnered with the with an outside organization to secure vaccinations for all students who were in the 12 to 15 years old age group on campus. Over 900 students have received at least their first vaccine before the end of this academic year. Now, looking at our student learning and living experiences, the return to campus this spring actually went incredibly well. Our public health guidelines allowed students to order takeout, which was a really big thing for a lot of students, to walk downtown, and to have an athletic season. We've also enjoyed really just beautiful weekends, and as well as some spring showers. And it really has been just great to see so many students outdoors together, playing spike ball or studying or simply relaxing on the great lawn. I now know that lawning is a verb here at Andover. I started to hold weekly Tuesday and Thursday lunches with groups of 10 or 12 students at a time under a tent at Phelps House. And it really was great just getting to know more students up close. These past several weeks really have brought moments of great joy and great hopefulness and a lot of positive energy. The athletic program was in full swing during the spring, including a friendly competition with our peer schools, thanks to a really intricate mapping of our sports activities that was conducted by our athletic director, Lisa Yole, and her team. We were able to provide fitness opportunities for nearly every student. We also have had to be flexible about our competition schedules due to pretty detailed health and testing protocols that all of our schools agreed to follow. Limited spectators were allowed to come and observe the games and to cheer on our students. Students and their parents have really been great in understanding and our constraints, but in their willingness to adjust and are just grateful to have this opportunity to watch their kids compete. With regard to the Knowledge and Goodness campaign, our alumni have been especially committed to the success of the campaign, and thanks to you and more than 18,000 alumni and parents and friends, we continue to make strong headway. While this year, of course, has been challenging for fundraising everywhere, we've been noticing a particular success in the areas of financial aid, equity and inclusion, and the planned new music building. As you all know, we just recently hosted our 4th PA Giving Day, and it was a great success, raising more than $1.7 million from over 2,500 donors around the world, including 47 states and 30 different countries. The volunteer efforts and the generosity of so many of you really made a huge difference, and we just want to thank you again for your continued support. So just a few thoughts as we look ahead for Andover. We've had an extraordinary year, and we've been able to experience both moments of great joy and light and moments of significant challenges. We are concerned, of course, about the pandemic's continuing impact on young people, particularly on their sense of wellness and their mental health. The Psych's wellness team of medical and counseling professionals have worked to emphasize positive and proactive self-care throughout this difficult time. And they've also been particularly focused on emphasizing the importance of staying engaged and connected to each other. They facilitated ongoing programs to provide knowledge and resources for our students, as well as to the entire PA community during this incredible year. And throughout the year, I was just so impressed by how Andover's faculty and staff, and most of all, our students, were able to adapt to constantly shifting circumstances, and even more importantly, they were able to support one another. I have admired our ability to recognize when we have succeeded, and to be honest, also to be very forthright in helping us identify when we haven't done as well as we should have done. I approach my role as head of school with great humility and with great pride with regard to our community's perseverance and our legacy of excellence, and all of us are coming together with a great sense of optimism for the future. And that future, we know, will be shaped in part by what we have gone through during this so-called pandemic year. We've had the responsibility to assess our performance and our outcomes. We're thinking a lot about lessons learned and strengths and weaknesses that we have identified during this stressful time. And we believe that we can look back and actually learn in a way that makes us an even stronger institution, even better prepared to meet our mission. One bright spot for our community was really an incredible commencement weekend that concluded this past Sunday. The class of 2021 was able to enjoy many of the traditional commencement events, including many that surely many of you remember, community convocation, prom, baccalaureate, and having their loved ones present to celebrate their achievement on Sunday morning. And as we think about all that we've been through in this past year, we think a lot about you, our alumni, who have been with us really every step of the way. You've supported us through volunteerism, engagement, and through financial support. This past year, Andover hosted 140 virtual events, including training, social gatherings, educational programs, and more. Alumni from around the world engaged with the school in a way that they have not been able to before, and while nothing can really compare to an in-person gathering, I do imagine that we will continue to have virtual events learning from the experiences of the past year, and we will continue to offer virtual events as a way for some alumni who are not able to come to campus. It was great, certainly, this past weekend, and there were a number of alumni around, and we hope that during this weekend, we'll be able to replicate as much as we can the excitement and enthusiasm that we have when we arrive here on campus together. I know that these connections with the institution are meaningful and demonstrate that really Andover is for life. So thank you again for all that you've done and continue to do in support of Andover as we gather a sense of place and realize how much that sense connects all of us. The video that we will now see is fittingly called Home. And after its conclusion, we'll shift to the portion that I always look forward to of Q&A with Jenny being the asker of questions. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you to those who took the time to send in questions. We have looked through them, and I have the great pleasure of sharing your questions with Raynard, and we'll get into that now. So we're coming up on almost the first anniversary of you and your family packing up and making the trip here to Andover. And when we think about just that resettling of your family, I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit back on July and August and what that was like arriving here. The campus was a bit quiet, almost locked down, if you will. And could you just reflect a bit about making Andover and Phelps House your home in that time?
Well, you can imagine it was a difficult transition in many ways. But many people didn't know. So we moved from Iowa, and just before we moved, our little town of Grinnell experienced a derecho, I think that's the name of it. It's a special windstorm in which you have these amazing winds that are almost hurricane strength. And so they knocked down all these trees. So we were without electricity for the 8 days leading up to moving. So the movers were literally packing with flashlights throughout the house. And of course, we had planned to have to get rid of a lot of things in that last week, and we couldn't. So they just had to pack up everything because we couldn't see anything. And then we moved here. Then we had to unpack all of that. So that was, in a way, sort of being in lockdown at Phelps House actually gave us a little bit of more concentrated time to unpack, and our kids sort of adjusted pretty fast. But it was an interesting transition, but it was fun.
So you move into Phelps House. People know the iconic house that sits across Main Street. And in that year, in that interim year last year, they did quite a bit of work to the house. Could you share a little bit about how the house has been updated?
So the house hadn't been unoccupied for an extended period for, I think, 70 or 80 years. So there was no air conditioning. There wasn't central heating. The windows didn't necessarily work well, and the house was notoriously cold. And while it had been clearly a house that was deeply loved by generations of inhabitants, it was not in great shape. So the school, to its great credit, took this opportunity to actually redo a lot of the house. And so the house is incredible. So the irony, of course, is that one of the reasons why it was redone is so that we could entertain, and yet we couldn't entertain for a year. So we entertained ourselves. So we got to know the house pretty well, and it really is a beautiful house. It's 200 years old, so we're adjusting, but it was a perfect place for lockdown, especially once we got rid of the bulk of the boxes.
And so we all worked from home, right? Starting in the fall, teachers here and faculty were certainly very present for our students. But you worked from Phelps House, is that right?
My office was on the upper left.
Okay. And as the campus opened more and more, you started getting into some buildings and into some spaces. Could you share a little bit about you're getting to know this campus? What are some of the spaces that have spoken to you or that you've found particularly beautiful around here?
Well, it's interesting because I probably have now been in maybe 30% of the buildings on campus. And because everything was locked down and I was operating from home. But we have a new dog. Well, he's not new anymore. He's over a year old, a German Shepherd named Aries, who's now becoming famous within our community. And so what we learned the community, the campus by walking him. We spent a lot of time on the Abbot campus, which is really beautiful. And so we spent a lot of time there initially, and then we gradually expanded the circle. And at some point, the sanctuary was opened, so that added a whole nother opportunity. And so we're more acquainted with the outside than the inside. So now I'm starting to section by section go through all the buildings. So I recently had a tour of all the Abbot buildings, and so I'm slowly gathering experiences and exposure to the campus. And in some ways, that's sort of interesting because I know more about the institution, about the school. So it's, I can, when I see things like going through the Abbott buildings, I know more about who lives in which buildings and what the purpose is and the history. I've read more of the history. So in some ways, delaying a bit has made the touring more meaningful.
Sure. Yeah, you understand it a little bit more. So you spoke just now, but also in your remarks earlier, about having students over to your house. So clearly you couldn't have them in the house. There were some guidelines around that were restricted that. Can you talk about those lunches and how you actually managed them?
So we had a tent put up at the back of the rear yard of Phelps. And it was great. It was like a circus tent. It was beautiful. Although it did fall when it snowed.
I saw that.
It collapsed, and we had to.
But it went back up.
No one was injured. No one was in it. But we put it back up, and so we would gather for lunch with 10 or 12 at a time. And the two co-presidents, Megan and Sal, would help arrange invitations to there was a group of student leaders, they would try to get different groups of students. And I asked them, each one to answer two questions. One, what part of the experience here did they consider to be the sort of quintessential Andover experience? And the second question was, if there was one thing you could change, what would it be?
Oh my gosh.
So I kept it turned out we stumbled upon those questions, and then we stuck with them when we saw that they worked, because everyone had, a lot of the comments about the quintessential experience was really about the human interaction, the close friends, or the ability to learn from different groups of people, and the quality of teaching. They were sort of not entirely surprising. The things that were things that could be changed were just issues that are very much in the minds of all of us now, how we can continue to promote mental health of students. Some of the, how we can, we're just finishing the first wave, I think, of the EBI, Empathy, Balance, and Inclusion courses. So they had a lot of comments about how they can make that better. And so they were very constructive and very mature. I mean, we had a whole discussion about the possibility of whether or not we should do what some colleges do, I think MIT does it, where the first year of courses are all pass-fail.
Oh.
And you would think everyone would be for that. Students are often for, but that wasn't the case.
No, not Andover students.
Actually, I learned that wasn't the case.
They want the 6.
Yeah. There was a discussion, but a pretty spirited discussion about grades and the purpose of grades, and clearly we have an extraordinary slice of students who want to learn and want to know how well they're learning.
Yes.
But that was just an example of something that sort of happened naturally, but it ended up being a really thoughtful, deep discussion about what the point of grade, why do we have grades, and what does it mean to learn, and what is the institution's obligation to provide information back to students about what they have learned and in what context. So yeah, I mean, there were lots of examples like that. So it was a lot of fun.
There's, when I visit with alumni, particularly during reunion, I will sometimes say, do you remember your lowest grade here? And like that, they can recall it.
Yeah. And so where we settled, the solution was, it should be pass-fail on the record, but every student should get their own. So they would know, they could calibrate, they would know where they were.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be released to anyone else. So that was their final recommendation.
And so when you think about that collection of answers, what do you now do with those?
So I kept notes on my phone, of course, and so I'm going to synthesize them and sort of come back and think through. Some of them we were already working on, so there's been a lot of thought about mental health, and so the ideas that came forth were useful. But I think the main message was keep emphasizing, don't let this drop.
Good.
But the other things like this discussion about grades, I think it's worth having conversation with the faculty about,
Yes.
especially in this year where, the students a class of students is coming in that has highly variable experiences over the last couple of years, a year and a half. So we're going to have to think about that, and maybe that's something we should think about.
So you and I both also get the perspective as a parent
Yes.
of the class of 24. And I know that my Christopher and your Emerson shared a music class
Yes.
together. And I'm wondering, that class and other classes that you saw as a dad, what did you learn both about the faculty and what did you learn about the school through Emerson's experience?
So it was an interesting sort of angle to see. And so first of all, Peter, my spouse, and I, we decided that we were going to keep distance, partly because we figured that it might mean something different to have me call a teacher
Likely.
about something that was
Yes.
happening with my kid. So we decided that we were going to stand back, and so we followed. And what was great was, one, students really, the faculty really get to know their students, and the comments that come back to us aren't the typical comments we were accustomed to seeing. They're very specific, and often with very specific recommendations, like you need to do this to get, you did this well, and this is, so it was very much sort of growth mindset. Everything was about, here are the things you can do, here are the things you're doing well, here are the things that you can do better. And so that impressed us, just the amount of thought that went into these comments in particular over the course of the year. We also sort of got to see a lot of his friends. In fact, that we just had our last classmate leave yesterday. There were, at one point, between 3 and 10 of his classmates at our house who stayed afterwards, a few to get their shots, and some just wanted to prolong the year without classes. And so we got to see that and how these close friendships develop.
Yes.
And Emerson was not in a residence hall, but he was made an honorary, at least for one term, he was an honorary Rockwell.
It's a rite of passage to be a Rockwell boy. Yes.
And so we got to see a lot of that through him, but it was a good experience. I mean, he loves the school. I mean, he really has a close group of friends. Really, even when his teachers were hard on him, even when teachers were hard on him, he would say, "Look, I have to learn how to do this. I have to learn how to learn and to meet the expectations of a wide array of different types of teachers." And so we saw him grow in that way. It wasn't like, "Oh, this teacher's hard on me." It was like, "This is the way this teacher works." And we would say that, this is life. You will have different teachers with different types of expectations, and your job is to learn. And that's what your teacher's job is, to help you learn. And there may be different ways that teachers do that. So buck up. We weren't quite that.
Yeah, it's okay. We know. I think across these decades of alumni who are tuning in today and reuniting across this weekend, I think that's certainly a very consistent thread of both a faculty who is a very pro-student and also tough on them, because I think they know the capacity and the potential of these kids. So I think that's true. So in that, there's word on the street that you might be one of those faculty members who's going to be in a class. Can you share anything about that?
So I'm hoping, and we may do it this year, but it may be deferred. One of my areas of research was looking at social factors in health, and this past year has been extraordinary in that we've had basically the entire country, and to some extent the whole world, has had like a basic course in epidemiology.
Yes. In
understanding patterns of disease and all the different ways that social factors play out in determining whether people live or die. And so the awareness of this, of the way that social factors get under the skin, how it is that this person in this job in this part of the country with this amount of resources gets sick and this person doesn't, and so I think there'll be a lot of more interest in students in understanding these complicated outcomes and risk factors. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to work with a course where we look at large data sets, particularly from the CDC, the National Center for Health Statistics, which is part of the CDC, where I used to run a division, and take some of those data sets from the place where I used to work, and have students sort of start pulling them apart and look at difference and look at which groups seem to be healthy and which ones aren't, and then try to start to think about why and look at factors and begin to sort of tease apart these complicated causal pathways. And so, yeah, that's the area where I hope to be able to do something in.
So, Raynard, your appointment looks particularly perfect, given what the last year has been like. And there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek with the board that they, maybe saw something on the horizon. Of course, they did not. But when I think about your leadership, but also your partnership with Dr. Patel, our medical director, could you talk a little bit about the hats you wore in making decisions about the campus, about taking guidelines into consideration, in working with Amy Patel and that incredible team at Sykes Wellness Center? How did you manage knowing and being educated the way that you are, but also wearing the hat of a head of school?
Well, I think I'm probably one of a very small number of leaders of institutions that got to sort of manage COVID in two different institutions.
Right.
And so, but coming here, it was very clear almost immediately that Dr. Patel was on top of things. I mean,
Yes.
She's really sharp. She's a great physician and has a very good sort of population perspective. And so it became clear that I was going to help around the margins. But what she and the leadership decided last year was that the goal was to meet these two objectives. One is to protect the health and well-being of our community. And that includes not just the people on campus, but our surrounding community. And two, to meet our mission. And so we kept saying everything was going to be about protecting our health and meeting our mission, and that any trade-offs we made were going to be informed by the best scientific evidence that we had, and a sense of what was essential in our mission. What were the essential elements, and then that we would adjust as our knowledge expanded. And so over the course of the year, we changed dramatically. We had several, I think 3 different ways of teaching, from all online and asynchronous to mostly online and synchronous to hybrid to in person. And so we had all these different ways of teaching. And faculty, to their credit, it may not sound like a big difference, but those different teaching modalities are very different. They require very different plans and approaches. Even having 1 or 2 classes, a class where you have 1 or 2 students online and everyone else in the class, just to sort of choreograph that. Even though we had 3 cameras around the room and did as much as we could, that is not the same as having 12 bodies around a table in a class. So faculty had to be constantly adaptive, and so the combination of sort of focusing on mission and having health and protecting the health of our community and following the science, those were our guideposts for the whole year. And when we had a choice, we'd always go back to those 2 things. How do the various options comply or not with the best scientific evidence? And how does this impact our core mission of transfer of knowledge, of educating? We also had an advisory committee that we were able to form, that Amy formed, that had some of the leading scientists from the Boston area. I mean, some of the leading scientists in this area, in the Boston area, we'd run things by. Because what people don't realize is that there weren't just 1 or 2 decisions. There were hundreds, literally hundreds of decisions about, okay, what about this room? What about Cochrane? What about how far space in Cochrane? What did you open the windows or not open them? I mean, just in looking around here, I can see 30 questions that just coming from this room. And every one had to be answered. And you can't just say, you can't shrug. I mean, because
It has to be.
Someone was going to ask, do we open the windows or not? Do we use the side pews or not? How many do we allow on campus, on the stage? What about in that first row? How many seats between? I mean, every one of those questions had to be answered. So it was good having these guideposts, but we had to do a lot of creative thinking. While I think it's fair to say that probably very few countries in the world, and certainly not our country, sort of got it all right. So even the standards were shifting. What Massachusetts as a state was saying might be different from the CDC, which might be different from the FDA, which might be different from the World Health Organization, which might be different from the scientists at Oxford who's following. I mean, so it was just extraordinary. The sort of all the different components and integrating this took a lot of work. But Amy was up to the challenge, and we also had to educate people. And I must admit that I'm a big supporter of the free press. Former member of the board of directors of ACLU of Iowa, so I'm really big on free speech and the free press. And one thing the press did that was remarkable, in some ways that they did better than our government in many ways, is educate. Some of the Pulitzer Prizes, one of the Pulitzer Prizes that just came out went for a writer at the Atlantic who wrote like 20 of these detailed articles about different aspects. And I followed, it was one of the publications I followed just because the quality of reporting was so good. And the author won a Pulitzer. But the New York Times, I mean, you could track what was happening in your state and with vaccinations and with hospitalization rates and mortality rates. And they were really creative sort of ways that particularly online, that organizations, both the press, but also organizations like Johns Hopkins School of Public Health had a wonderful website that had all sorts of information. So we followed all those all those sites, and across them eventually we would come to a decision that we felt comfortable with. And we always said, every time we made a decision, we said, and if the evidence changes, we reserve the right to change this, and we might change it 3 times. But if the evidence changes 3 times, we will change the answer 3 times if it's necessary. So we would always sort of add that little asterisk that no matter what was going on, this might change. Deal with it.
And actually this year, we saw it moving right from spring sports came back, then spring sports with fans came back, musical performances came back, then musical performances with an audience came back. Like it felt like it moved to having commencement. That commencement we had was the 5th one we planned, and it was greatly appreciated that there wasn't a moment of making the decision, calling it a day, and just sitting still.
Yeah, we didn't stop thinking.
No.
And so it made it hard for people like you.
It's okay. It was a joyful work.
We had 5 different plans, and you weren't alone. There were lots of parts of campus that had 5 to 10 different iterations of Lisa Yole and athletics. Numerous conversations.
Well, and I hope that that's been a good introduction of you to this spirit of this community, that this place is deep in adults who are here to keep it moving, all focused on the kids, right? From our physical plant folks to the folks who work in the dining hall to our Psychs Wellness Center to coaches, everybody.
And their willingness to say, we're not in the perfect world anymore. We're in the we're going to do the best we can with what we know and with what our mission is. And that, people were, there were times when everyone was unhappy. I was unhappy. None of us liked doing any of this. And I must admit that sort of people were, by and large, were very supportive. And we tried to be generous too when we got that email with a lot of caps and exclamation points. We would,
take a breath.
We'd say, isn't that special?
So let's talk about another big workload that has been going on throughout this year, which is the Andover's Anti-Racism Task Force. So they have been, they launched close to a year ago, and they've been working throughout this year with everything else that's going on. Is there any updates that you could share with us?
So we are at the final stages. This was a really elaborate process of multiple working groups, and we had parents and alum and faculty and staff, and it was really a pretty amazing amount of work. And we're now at the stage of synthesizing sort of the findings. I think in overall across the surveys, we had like 4,000 comments of one sort or another. And so, now we're at the hard part though, and I'm involved with lots of institutions that are at the same stage. Now we have to decide what to do. And this is hard. Because we have a long list of potential ideas, and we can't do all of them. We have to prioritize. We have to sort of think about which ones make sense now versus potentially later. There are legal constraints. I mean, this is a really complicated area of the law. So we have to think that, we have to get legal reviews on things we do. I mean, so it's just, everything has to be thought through and prioritized, and some have budgetary implications. How do we fund an activity? And also, perhaps most importantly, while there were a lot of us who were deeply connected to this process and the thought process, there were a lot of people who weren't, who were just trying to get through the year,
Sure.
and just sort of were not engaged, and yet have a stake in what happens out of this. So we're going to have this another hurdle where we have to sort of, as we think about next steps, we have to both reach out to people who were deeply involved and committed and informed, and many people who are not, especially who are sort of raw from the year. So we have to think in a different way, and it's going to be a challenge, and we won't get it all right. We'll try to learn. We'll try to make reasonable steps. We'll try to be accountable. We'll try to be transparent. But it too will require iterative decision making, and there are lots of people out there who aren't, where this hasn't been a focus, where we have to figure out a way to bring them in, and I think we can do it, but it will take effort. That too will take effort.
So, even though this is the end of a fiscal and academic year for us, we so quickly pivot to preparing for opening of school. Could you tell us a little bit about admissions this year in a very unique year?
So we had an extraordinary admissions year. So we had, I think, an 18% increase in applications. And this was seen at many, many private schools, partly because of the extraordinary pressures that public schools faced. And many people were disappointed with what some public schools chose to do. So there was a switchover, and both students applying, families coming, and actually there's also evidence. I was just at a research seminar that showed that some faculty, a significant number of faculty, quit public schools, and many of them were switching over to private schools. And there are implications for this, but so we had a large number of applications. And we also had a most diverse application pool we've ever had. And probably part of that is what was our version of what also happened at many highly selective colleges and universities. They were forced to drop the standardized testing.
Yes.
And that meant that standardized testing, while it can be valuable in many ways, it can be a barrier for students. So we got more applications, and we probably had we did have our most selective year ever in the history of the school, to our knowledge. And we had 10% admit rate.
Wow.
Which is extraordinary. But we were able to still, in the incoming class, reach, I think, around 26% underrepresented domestic kids of color. So we were able to sort of admit a diverse class, and we had a yield rate, which yield is the percentage of students who accept an offer of admission, and it was 84%. So we had an extraordinary yield rate, low admit rate, and what that meant though is that we had to turn down a lot of gifted kids. I mean, when you get down to that, when you look at a pool that's very strong, and then you get down to a tiny little slice of it, it means that there were a lot of people on the other side of that 10%
Right.
who could have done well here
Yeah.
and could have had an extraordinary experience. And we had to keep, I know our admission staff is very good at telling that to students that, that we probably could have admitted 2 or 3 classes of extraordinary students. So that's hard. And also, we don't want to be perceived as impossible to get into.
Right.
We want to be open, and so we're going to think about that.
Okay.
There's not much we can't like say no to applications. So we don't control that, but we're going to think about that in a way. So I think that incoming class is yet another extraordinary class, and so we're preparing for all of that. And many of the traditions will be very close to the usual. We will probably require vaccination for students with a small number of exceptions. And we know that we've made a lot of progress. We're pretty close. We're probably, I think, 70+% who have gotten their first shot, at least, and maybe probably more by now. So we will require a vaccine. And there will be students, particularly some students, international students, who are in countries where the vaccine isn't there, it's not available. Sure. And it may not be available even as late as September. So we'll have to have a second path for kids who come in who haven't been vaccinated. We're still working that out. There'll be some form of a quarantine, and then we'll give the vaccine. Vaccine access isn't as much of a problem now.
Right.
So we'll probably, but that's a whole protocol.
Planning.
You have to plan all of this.
Yeah.
Because there will be some differences among the students. And but we will be back in class. We are not offering online courses. We are an in-person school. So while we learned a lot and we'll use online resources probably in more classes than we would have otherwise, now that more and more students and faculty have gotten comfortable with at least some form of online learning, we aren't going to have that as an option. So there won't be an option of students staying and going from home and being online for the year. So we're not offering that. There are schools who will, but we will not. So we have to plan out all of that. We're back to the ritual. I've told people that even though it's great that we're back to near normal, in some ways things become more complex now because we have some groups of students who are very well protected. And faculty, our vaccination rate in our faculty is over 90%. Faculty have done a great job in getting the vaccines. But it becomes sort of more complex because we won't be back to normal, and yet we won't be in complete lockdown. We will be close to normal,
right.
And we will probably have to define a new normal. We may know by then, for example, whether or not we require booster shots.
Right.
What happens with variants? So they're like many questions that we're going to have to answer. So while we are delighted, all of us are delighted that we have been fortunate enough to be able to have the advantage of being able to take advantage of all the science that led to these vaccines. And we're just incredibly grateful as a community for that. It ain't over yet. So we have to sort of be prepared for complexity, because there may be some students and faculty who decide that they're more comfortable continuing wearing masks. There are people who are immunosuppressed who can't get vaccinated,
right.
who will probably continue to wear masks. So there are people who may be vaccinated, but they, for whatever reason, didn't have a strong immune response. So, and there may be some people for religious reasons aren't vaccinated and will have to wear masks. So that's another complexity. Before it was easy. Everyone wears masks.
Right.
Everyone.
Yeah, at all times.
At all times, period.
Yes.
Now it's not going to be that.
Right.
And we don't want to stigmatize
Sure.
people.
Yes.
So it gets more complicated in an interesting way. And I think it's this, at some level, of course, it's been a horrible experience in so many ways. It also is a learning experience for us as a people, as humans, as a community, as a society. Is this a learning opportunity? And I hope that high on the list is heightened empathy, that we sort of, all of us, because all of us had bad days.
You did.
I'm sure my kids can certainly attest that we all had bad days, but we were not at our best. And so we hope that we can all learn from that.
So thinking of a little bit as a final question of thinking about your family and thinking a little bit about self-care and thinking about exhaling a little bit, often the world of academia lends itself to maybe a small window in the summer of a little bit of time off. Anything you can share about what you'll do this summer to get a little bit of that?
So you know, Peter's Greek American and our family is in Greece, so we go a lot to usually spend a big chunk of time every summer in Greece, and my father's family is Jamaican, so we usually spend some time there. The international travel is still complicated, so we finally decided we're probably not going to be able to do international travel. So, but we are going to Peter's family home where he grew up in North Dakota, so we're going to spend at least a week there. North Dakota is a beautiful state.
Yes.
I don't think we have a student from North Dakota
Currently?
at the moment. We're going to work
We have
on that.
alumni. We
We have
great
alumni
from
but
there.
I don't think we have a student from North Dakota. So we may be on a mission when we're there. And so we're going to go to the Badlands, and so which is
Love
beautiful.
Badlands.
It's
Yes,
really
beautiful.
It's one of the most under-visited national parks.
Because it's a little bit out of the way.
It's
of
out of the way, but
normal
it's
street.
huge, and it's as beautiful as the
Gorgeous.
Grand Canyon. I think.
I
It's
agree.
so we're going to do that, and we have a number of series of smaller trips to the Boundary Waters and Minnesota and a few other places. So we're gonna be domestic and mostly north.
That's great. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the year and for your leadership of this school and your time this morning.
Well,
I
thank
really
you. It's been
appreciate
a pleasure. I hope to some extent I'll get a do-over in the fall.
I don't think you have to do anything over, but we'll be happy to introduce you to all of these wonderful alumni in person.
In person.
All right,
In person
deal.
rocks.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
Steve
you.
Matloff. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kington, and thank you, Jenny. We greatly appreciate both of you and so many others. As is tradition, we will close this meeting with the Singing of America, recorded by Summer Seward, class of 21. Congratulations on your graduation last week and on joining the 1s and 6s reunion cycle. Summer doesn't know this, but I actually had the privilege and honor of reading her name in the diploma circle ceremony last Sunday. So handing off to Summer this morning is particularly meaningful to me.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Our glorious land today, neath education's sway, soars upward still. Its hills of learning fair, bounties we all may share. Behold them everywhere, on hill and hill. Thank you. I will see you at the 2026 reunion.
Thank you, Summer. Thank you all for being part of our reunion festivities. I now adjourn this meeting of the Andover-Abbot Alumni Association, and I cannot wait to be together with all of you in person very soon. Everyone be safe. Thanks.